Hi, welcome to my Take 5 deep dive. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll already know I've done a first impressions, and that was just me opening the box and seeing how it all worked. And it's quite a simple synth, so could get most of it out during that, but there are a few little functions in here that I've not mentioned before. And also you may well have seen my Prophet 5 versus the Take 5. I've done a Prophet 6 versus the Take 5 and a Prophet 600 versus the Take 5. I'm not sure if they're all uploaded yet. It depends when I get a chance to edit them, but I'm sure one or two of them will be up there. So there's a bit of this information that's already out and about. And if you are interested in those, do check them out and I'll leave links in the description. So what have we got here? We've got Sequential's latest take on a 5-voice VCO polysynth. We've got 2 oscillators plus a sub and a noise source. We've got a single filter, 24 dB resonant low pass, 2 envelopes, 2 LFOs, quite a comprehensive modulation matrix with 16 slots. We've got an arpeggiator, a step sequencer, and effectively 2 little effects units in there as well. So much more than you'd get on a standard old Prophet or the Prophet 600. As I say, watch those videos if you want to see how it stacks up against them. But a really interesting little synth this, because it doesn't look like the old Prophets. It's got a much more modern looking case than my other Prophets. I've got a Prophet 5, which is about to become a Prophet 10. I've got a Prophet 6, which I'm thinking this may replace because it's smaller and can it do the same sort of thing. I've also had the Rev 2 and the Prophet 8, and I've got a Pro 1. And this feels the most modern of all of them, maybe because it's the latest release. And the one thing you really do notice on this is the great big cut-off knob, a bit like they've got on the Pro 3. And I prefer this knob so much more than the little ones you get on the Prophet 5 or the Prophet 6 or the Rev 2 or the Prophet 8, for example. A really nice little addition, that, although it's not a brand new thing, they do have it on the Pro 3. It's quite a hefty little unit. It comes in at 7.7 kilos, I think, and that shows it's got 5 VCOs, and there's a fair bit of electronics inside, and it doesn't feel like you're picking up a VST in a box, because it definitely isn't. You've got 10 analog oscillators, plus, I suppose it's 5 analog filters. I think the envelopes and the LFOs and the amplifier in there are all DSP, but that doesn't really bother me in the slightest. So what have we got on the back? We don't have any external inputs or CV in and out. We've got the 3 standard 5-pin DIN MIDI in, out and through, plus USB for MIDI. That's not for audio. A foot switch, a pedal, headphones out, and a left and right out. So all quite simple on the back. The knobs are rubberized. There's a nice bit of resistance to them. They feel really high quality. And on the potentiometers here, I don't know if you can hear that clicking. That's really handy when you want to get to a specific value. And you can see it's got this little screen here, which is quite useful as well. We've got 256 slots for presets all in all. Half of those are factory, so you get 128 that you can program yourself. Pick a bank 1, and then pick whichever preset you want. So there's 128 user presets. That's not massive, but it's enough. And there's also the librarian and editor that you can buy for it. As with all this Dave Smith stuff, you've got to buy the editors separately. And here's a quick executive summary of what I've discovered after playing with it for a couple of weeks now. It has a steep drop off at about 15,000 hertz, over 10,000 hertz. You can see on the frequency analysis, there's a steep drop that you don't get on the older Prophets. The filter isn't as resonant as it is on the older Prophets, but you don't lose any volume or any bass once you crank up the resonance. So it sounds beefier, but not quite as spiky. FM on this can sort of replicate the polymod sections on the Prophet 6 and the Prophet 5, but it's not identical. It's a little bit more limited, but the modulation section takes it to places they just couldn't dream of going. And finally, the effects are really nice. They might not be the best perfect sound and effects, but they just have a real bit of fun about them. The reverb's huge, and you can do daft things with the delays and stuff, things that you can't do on the Prophet 6. It makes the Prophet 6 feel a little bit sensible. Okay, so that's the executive bit. I'll show it all in a second. But one other thing I think I should mention before we kick off is that you may have seen lots of pictures of this and you can see what's happening, but there are a couple of hidden functions, not that many. There's about 20 little menu items in this, so it's really not many at all. The first couple are oscillator 1 and 2 key follow. We don't have a separate switch for key follow like you do on other synths. It's in a little menu system, but it is there, so you can decouple the oscillators from the keyboard. We've got separate oscillator glide for 1 and 2. There's a glide rate here which is universal, but we can go in and change them so we can actually have separate glide rates. The Unison detune is in here as well. The vintage knob is a vintage knob like you get on the Prophet 5 and the Prophet 6, a bit like a slop, but the Unison detune you have to access via the menu. Filter tracking is via the menu as well. And you can reset both the LFOs on key press. Again, that's in the menu. And finally, both of the envelopes have a delay, so they're actually a DADSR, and that's in the menu as well. So just a couple of little things that you might not realize it can do, and I didn't realize it could do when I first got it. Without getting the manual out, without starting to play with it, you don't realize it's got those little extra things. So that's a massively quick overview. Let's start now with the proper deep dive, and we'll start, as ever, with the oscillators. We set the default patch with down and -2. You can also go into the global settings and find it there on, I think it's 30, is it? No, 30 is calibrate the voices. 28, right, it's the same thing. So there are shortcuts. I don't know all the shortcuts off by heart. There's a manual for that. And I mentioned the -2 octaves button there, and that's because you can split the keyboard so that this lower half of the keyboard is basically you playing down here on another one. So if I play this note here, go down an octave, down 2 octaves, but this one is still. So even though it's only got a small keyboard, it is a little bit more flexible than you might think. Anyway, back to the oscillators. What have we got here? We've got 2 identical oscillators that go from a sine to a sawtooth to a square and then to a pulse. And obviously this is all modulatable. They're tuned by octave with this knob here, which is different to the other Prophets. Maybe that's why it's not called a Prophet. So this pitch knob here, this sort of fine-tuned knob, takes you up or down 7 semitones. Let's put it back onto a sawtooth. And what you can see from that frequency analysis is what I mentioned in my little executive summary, a massive roll-off on the higher frequencies. And it looks quite dramatic, that actually, but when you listen to it compared to other stuff, it's not that noticeable. It's noticeable, it's not as open sounding, it's maybe a bit richer or warmer sounding, but it doesn't sound dull. It does sound nice, but it does have its own character. And another little oddity I've noticed with the sawtooth is if I play it really low, we get a really curved shape, and the higher we play it up the keyboard, the straighter it gets. I'm not sure I can think of another synth that does that. Anyway, let's go over to the square. We can go all the way to 0. And to put that into PWM, go to one of the LFOs, destination, pulse width or shape. Now let's add a sub. And what's the sub? Then you go to square or squarish. an octave below. We don't have a sub on oscillator 2. So very much like the Prophet 6 this. We've got some noise here, we've got white noise and pink noise. Clockwise is white, anti-clockwise is pink. And we've got oscillator sync. So syncing 1 to 2, let's modulate the pitch of oscillator 1 with envelope 1. Go into the mod matrix. Go into modulation slot 1. Envelope 1. Let's add a bit of modulation amount and send it to oscillator 1, octave. That just means it's going through the octaves, not fine. That's a really nice sounding sync. I put that up against the Prophet 600 and it sounded identical. And navigating these menus, you use the left-hand knob to select the value and the right-hand knob to change the value. Let's change the mod source then to LFO 1. And increase the modulation amount. So you get a huge range of modulation there. I tested the pitch of oscillator 1 using LFO 1 and it was over 5 octaves. I think it was 64 semitones, and 64 makes me think it's obviously digital because 64, 128 and the rest of it, but sounds really good. In fact, let's do that. LFO 1 destination, the pitch. That may even now be more than 5 octaves because I'm modulating it from 2 different sources there. So that's just LFO 1 on its own, then LFO 1 in the mod matrix as well. It's going even higher, isn't it? So it actually adds to it, which is sort of nuts because that's massive. And then we've got this mysterious FM button as well, and that modulates oscillator 1 with oscillator 2. And this knob now is dedicated to the amount of modulation oscillator 2 is feeding into oscillator 1, and you can't hear oscillator 2 while that's happening. Let me just show you that. Put the default patch back on. So oscillator 1, oscillator 2, if I put FM in, I'm now only hearing oscillator 1 being modulated by oscillator 2. And I did do a little separate video on this. It might be worth digging out because it's a little bit confusing when you first start using this, because you can use oscillator 2 as a mod source anywhere without having FM pushed in, but then this knob becomes the oscillator 2 level and adds to the modulation that you're getting through the modulation matrix as well. Almost multiplies what you're getting on the modulation matrix. So if you've got something on the modulation matrix set up with oscillator 2 and you have this turned down to 0, you don't get any modulation. So it confused me when I first turned it on. But as I say, I've got a little separate video for that. It's not confusing once you've worked it out, but a little bit of a head scratcher. And I'll just show you why it is a little bit of a head scratcher. If we go into the mod matrix and we put oscillator 2 as the source and oscillator 1 octave as the destination, we're now getting FM without pushing the FM button. And with this FM, we can hear oscillator 2 and oscillator 1. So, it's oscillator 1, oscillator 2, let's pitch it a bit lower or something. So we're hearing the 2 of them there, and I will now increase the amount of modulation we're getting. So with the modulation on 0, it sounds like that. That's the 2 oscillators playing. And with the modulation on full, we're getting something going on at least. I don't know if it's identical or not, but pitch this slightly differently so you get a more radical effect. We're definitely getting it there, aren't we? And that means you can hear oscillator 2. And have a little bit of FM rattle without engaging the FM button. So, as I say, it can be a bit of a head scratcher. There's ways around doing things, but it does mean that FM on this is quite unique, really. What does FM and sync sound like together? Someone asked in one of the previous videos. Let's have a listen. There's your sync, just as we heard earlier. Now with FM. That's how it sounds, really nice and gritty. I think that brings me to the end of the envelopes then. Should we move over to the filter? And what's really nice about this, it doesn't do the typical Prophet thing of quantizing the cutoff to semitones. It's just really smooth. And another nice thing is that when we bring in the resonance, there's no drop in volume. So that's really nice. It's got a really nice character that it sort of sings to you. But what it doesn't do is have a really high resonant peak. If we look at the frequency analysis, you can see the resonant peak is just about the same level as the fundamental. And maybe that's how they've been able to make it so that you don't lose any bass when the resonance comes in, because obviously if the resonant peak was 3 times as loud, everything would have to drop a bit. And I think that's actually really quite a nice compromise. It makes the filter a little bit gentler, a little bit mellower than others, but it actually makes it really, really usable. And it's not very often that you go into those really nasty, gnarly resonant peaks. If you want something to do that, get yourself an MS-20. And another minor thing to note about not having such a high resonant peak is that when you're playing something low down and you drop the filter, you're not getting those really, really resonant tones. But you are if you turn the oscillator off. Ah, that's beautiful, that is. So you can still do those 808 boomy sort of subs. And very nice they are too. You might have noticed there's no keyboard tracking on this, and that's in the menu. If we go to Program, key to LPF frequency, let's turn that up to 127. There we go, keyboard tracking. Let's try and do some bass with that, shall we? You need some big woofers to hear that. So you can still do it. So I think the fact that it doesn't go so resonant, I did compare it, as I say, with the Prophet 5, the Prophet 6 and the P600, and you know, you think, oh, it's not quite as bitey, but actually it can do pretty much everything the others can do without losing the bass when you're bringing in the resonance. And those sort of tones aren't the sort of things that you use every day anyway. So I think it's a nice, if it's a design choice or a compromise, I'm imagining it's actually a compromise, because why would you take it away if you didn't have to? But I think it's really nice. It doesn't bother me in the least. We've also got a drive circuit here as well. Sort of kills the resonance a bit. It's quite a subtle effect. It's a bit like the multi-drive on the Sub 37. But it's definitely there. It's definitely adding some richness and some warmth. And you can modulate that with oscillator 2, a bit like audio mod or audio rate mod or whatever it's called on the Rev 2 and the Prophet and the Tempest. And I'll just show you that quickly as well, even though it's a modulation thing, but it's a filter thing. Go to the modulation matrix, modulation slot 1, oscillator 2 is the first option on the modulations. Let's whack that up a bit to the cutoff. Low modulation. And although we've only got a single filter here, we do actually have a high pass filter in the effect. Yes, it's digital, but it does mean that you can do those sort of sound sculpting things with band passes and high passes. And it's resonant, and we'll look at it in the effects section later on. I think that brings me to the end of the filter then. Let's move over to the LFOs. I've touched on the LFOs before, but there's a little bit more to them than at first meets the eye. LFO 1 is global, it's a single LFO. LFO 2 is LFO per voice, which means there's 5 LFOs in LFO 2. And I'll show you what that means in a second. But just quickly, let's go through the shapes. So we'll put oscillator 1, pitch as the destination. That's the triangle, that's bipolar, all the others are unipolar. We can sync that to the clock. And we can also reset it on every note hit, and that's in the program menu as well. It's off at the minute, let's put it on. Turn it off again. So you always get a repeatable sound. Things you don't have on these are single shot, for example, so you can't use them as a simple envelope. Moving over to LFO2 then, what am I talking about per voice? Put this destination on the pitch as well. Let's put it on a ramp or a sawtooth. You can hear there's 3 LFOs playing. So basically you've got 5 separate LFOs in there. You can't do that on LFO 1, and this makes it like a polyphonic LFO. If you were using something like the Prophet 5 and you take oscillator 2 and you put it into low frequency mode, you've got different LFO rates depending on what key you're playing, and you can do that on this as well. So it might not be perfectly obvious that you can do that when you haven't got the polymod section, but if we change the rate of LFO 2 depending on where we are on the keyboard, so we will go to modulation source 1 again, and we'll use the note number as the source and LFO 2 as the destination. LFO 2 frequency there. Slow, fast. So that's 5 separate LFOs, all playing at different rates. Very nice little touch. Okay, as we've been talking about the modulation section, let's move over to that now. We get into the modulation section using either the source assign or the destination assign buttons. And then, as I showed earlier, we use these two knobs to scroll through. We've got 19 sources, including noise and audio out. And they're marked with a P or an M, that's if it's polyphonic or monophonic. So oscillator 2, for example, is polyphonic, because if you're playing 5 different notes, you can send out 5 different voltages, or 5 different signals, I'm not sure the voltages. And then you've got monophonic signals as well, like LFO1. There's only one, it doesn't matter where you're playing on the keyboard. So the envelopes, for example, are polyphonic, aren't they? Because you've got an envelope per voice. And I think there's around 30 different destinations, which include things like the reverb size, effects mixes, reverb decay, envelope amounts, LFO rates. So really comprehensive. When you compare it to other profits, and I shouldn't be comparing it to profit, I should shut up about the profits, it's not a profit. And you can also modulate the modulation amounts as well, so a bit like almost like a dual layer modulation matrix. So tons of stuff in there. Let's try and modulate the rate of LFO1 with LFO2. So LFO1, so go into LFO2, put it on LFO1 frequency as the destination, let's turn that up. You can hear that's doing something anyway. So next up is the Arpeggiator. The Arpeggiator is clocked by the clock, which is next to it, and you can sync that up externally, internally, and all the things you'd expect to be able to do. So let's turn the Arpeggiator on. It's quite a simple arpeggiator, this. 1 octave, 2 octave, or 3 octave. It's 3. 2, and that's 1. So it's what you call exclusive. It doesn't play the top note and the bottom note twice, which means you can do stranger things. Then we've got this nice sort of interesting mode called repeat, and it'll repeat the notes twice, well, once, twice, or 3 times. So let's try that on a simple chord. Let's try it repeating twice, it should play 3 times. Yeah, and 4 times. And we've got different modes, just really simple, up and down, random, and assign. So super simple, but quite effective. You can hold as well. And you've got different hold modes. Go into program again. We've got ARP relatch on or off. So when it's on, when you play a chord, or when you play a new chord, it will change all the notes to that new chord. When relatch is off, it'll just keep on adding and adding, so. That's quite fun. Okay, step sequencer next. All the presets have got a little sequence in them, which I always like. In fact, the intro track was based on one of these. I don't know which one. "64 steps, no parameter lanes, record something. Play it back. It's really simple to put rests and ties in. Go to record again. You can see which step we're on here. We're on step 15. Let's put the last one for step 16. Play it. And if we want to tie notes together, we press right while we're holding it. So right adds a tie, program adds a rest. So let's try that. So it's as simple as that. There are no parameter locks, there's no accents, there's no lanes of motion, it's just the notes. But you can transpose while you play. You just press record while you move around the keyboard, and you can play on top of that as well. Obviously, you can't do that if you've already used up all your 5 voices. Let's try some chords then, shall we? It's not going to win any Grammys, but it does work. Let's go over to the Unison mode now. No difference. And you guessed it, maybe you guessed it, you go into program mode and you change the number of voices. All 5 voices. And then we go to page 11 and we got Unison detune. We've also got the vintage knob here. You can hear it making things a bit more sloppy, and look at that in a second. And Unison mode also doubles as chord mode, so play a chord, hit Unison mode. Oh, it's because I've got Unison detune on, isn't it? Oh, idiot. Okay, Unison detune's on 4. That's better. Yeah, don't have Unison detune on when you're playing chords, it sounds rubbish. Yeah, so you get all that lovely old school Chicago house style stuff really easily. I was hoping that by engaging the hold function and then playing lots of notes across the keyboard, and then pressing Unison, I'd get that really widespread chord. That's the old chord. And I've just used a synth, and I can't remember which one it was that did that. And it's a really nice little idea. Anyway, let's have a look at the envelopes. I'm not going to go into too much depth about these. Envelopes aren't the most interesting thing, but there are a couple of points to note on this. Envelope 2 can act like a Juno in that it's only got one envelope for the filter and the amplifier, or it's the filter and the gate for the amplifier. And that's great because it frees up envelope 1. It says it's an auxiliary envelope here, but it's still called envelope 1 in the modulation settings. But just a really nice little touch that. Also, we've got a delay on both of them as well. Let's just try and show that. So again, just something that might not be obvious when you first see the synth. So should we move over now finally to the effects section, and this is really nice. The top line is a multi-effect. We've got tape delays, bucket brigade delays, phasers, flanges, chorus, distortion. What else have we got in there? A ring mod and a rotary speaker. And on the reverb, we've just got reverb. We haven't got a choice of hall, plate or spring. We've just got a single reverb circuit, but it's a really nice one. Take a listen to this. So it's really simple. We've just got 5 parameters. We've got the mix. We all know what that does. Damping. And actually, damping's a bit weird because the more you turn it up, the less damping there is. Let's close it down a bit. And using damping and a long delay means you can have that big delay sound, but it closes down quickly. Pre-delay. And that's a really nice long reverb, isn't it? And finally, we've got this tone knob. So it gives all the flavours actually that you need to sweeten up your sound. I tend not to use spring reverbs, I think they sound a bit rubbish, and rooms, you know. I suppose it depends what you're doing, but I like electronic music and doing electronic things, so I don't want it to sound like I'm playing a cello in a room. I like it to sound like I'm playing a synth in a cathedral. Much more fun. But probably better on a different sound. Let's take a look at the top row then. Start off with a digital delay. That goes really fast, almost flangey. Well, definitely flangey. And this is all modulatable. Shall we see if we can modulate the time of that with LFO1? So destination FX time, there you go. That was simple to do, wasn't it? And what I've found with these is that they're really good fun, slightly mental effects. They sound nice, but they move it further on than the Prophet 6. The Prophet 6 always seemed to be a little bit calm, a bit sensible, a bit suit and tie, whereas this feels a little bit more casual, shall we say. Let's go to tape delays. Can't have any of that fun on the P6. The camera just ran out of battery and I left this sitting here. I thought it had stopped, and about 5 minutes later it had sort of come back to life because I'd left the feedback on. Really quite cool. And as I say, you just can't do that sort of thing on the Prophet 6. This just takes the effects and just has really good fun with them. Let's try another chorus. Yeah, that's really nice, isn't it? I could play with that all day. Let's stick a bit of reverb on that as well. Nothing too mental. Yeah, overloading it with effects doesn't sound great, does it? But on their own, they're quite nice. It's a shame you can't have like a high-pass filter and a delay on it. I'll show you in a second. We do have a high-pass filter on this. It's a shame this is just a dedicated reverb, but I suppose DSP power, what you're paying for, you know, costs and the like, I suppose, make things a little bit more complicated. But I think I always find it with presets. I don't like presets when they're covered in effects, and as soon as you start putting too many effects on, things start to go a bit awry. But let's have a listen to the high pass filter. It's not super resonant, but it's nice enough. It's very gentle and placid, a bit like the main filter. But it does mean we can do bandpass and all those sort of nice things that I did in the intro track. So absolutely hours and hours of fun to be had in there. Got ring mod as well. So loads of useful tones in that as well. And we've got a distortion circuit. Again, tons of fun to be had with that. And finally, a rotary speaker. I say finally, I've missed out the phaser and the flanger, but the phasers and the flangers, and they're quite nice, but I'm not gonna, can't show everything, or maybe I should, I don't know, but I'm not gonna, because my camera keeps running out of battery. I was looking for an organ sound. It's always just quicker to make them yourself, isn't it? So. Let's put on some filter tracking. Resonant filter. Bit of a sub. Organ-ish. Let's put the rotary speaker on. I've got to say, it's not my favourite effect. But it's a different tone if you want it. Okay, so as I say, I'm not going to go through absolutely everything. One thing I've not done yet is the overdrive circuit. Let's put basic tone on again. Really dirty and aggressive. I think this is digital as well. I don't think it's analog. So not bad. It's not as nice, I don't think, as the one on the Prophet 6. That is an analog one, and I do some nice kicks with that. If you look at my Prophet 6 versus this, Prophet 6 can do some really nice sort of deep, mellow kicks. This doesn't do it quite as well, and I think it's just because I was relying on the overdrive circuit on that, and this is a slightly different one, so it doesn't act in exactly the same way. It's not bad, it's just not the same. It may well be the overdrive for you. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've missed. I've looked at the glide. I've not played the glide, but we know what glide does. Vintage modes, Unison, LFOs. I think I've covered it all. I may have missed a little bit here and there. So that's it. I think I've covered everything. And if I haven't covered everything here, do take a look at the other videos, because if you watch all those, there's probably a few hours worth now of me looking at the Take 5, or there will be in the next week or two. You know, you'll definitely get a really good feel for what it is, what it sounds like, and what it can do. So what are my final thoughts after playing with this for a few weeks? It's a right little old charmer, this. I did buy it myself. Sequential haven't sent this to me. as with all my other sequential kit, it's all mine. I bought it all. Everything I've demoed against it is all my stuff. And I got this thinking that I could do with a bit more space in the studio. Can I replace the Prophet 6 with it? Am I going to replace the Prophet 6 with it? I'm still not 100% sure. I would prefer if this had just a couple more keys on it, but I understand why it hasn't got them. But I do quite like doing a bit of this and that, but not too much of it. I don't really worry if it's 4 or 5, but 3.5 just feels a tiny bit stingy for the way I like to play, at least. But I'm not that bothered by it, so I'm absolutely torn now. Do I keep this and sell the Prophet 6 and end up with, you know, the best part of £1,000 in the bank? Or do I keep the Prophet 6? This has got so many really nice things going for it. The effects are really nice, but I've got loads of effects. So I'm not going to keep this just for the effects. The playability wise, I think you get more from this on the mod section and programming it. You can do a lot more with this. I do like the polymod section on the Prophet 6, but I've got a Prophet 5. So I'm actually leaning towards ditching the Prophet 6 and keeping this. But I will keep you posted on that. It's a really hard decision, but I'm just thinking of the cash and I really don't need the Prophet 6. I'm just trying to give myself an excuse to get rid of it, really. So I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere, and if it was, please take a look at subscribing, ringing the bell and sharing. And also, if you are thinking about getting one of these, do check out the Perfect Circuit audio link below, because it's an affiliate link, so I might get a little bit of a kickback from it, and it doesn't cost you any more, so it supports the channel. So it's a win-win-win-win-win. So I will see you next time.